Pamela McCall on CFAX 1070.
Good morning. Thanks so much for tuning in. There's no time like the present to battle terrorists. That from Prime Minister Stephen Harper as he argues for passage of the Conservatives' controversial anti-terror bill. A public forum on Bill C-51 is being held here in Victoria tonight at the First Metropolitan United Church on Balmoral Road. One of the concerns being raised about the anti-terror bill is how it will impact protesters if it's passed. My guest this morning in studio, Laurel Collins, Professor of Social Justice Studies at UVic. She is a panelist at tonight's discussion. A pleasure having you, and thank you so much.
Hi, Pamela. Nice to be here.
Let's set this up. What are the general concerns about this anti-terror bill? They seem to be gathering pace.
So yeah, the anti-terror bill kind of in general has countless concerns. You can kind of go at it from any number of angles. A lot of people are talking about the lack of oversight for CSIS involved in this bill. A lot of people are upset about the kind of threats to free speech. There's a new kind of speech crime being created in this bill. People are upset about the expansion of CSIS's powers. Before, CSIS would only be a kind of an information gathering organization, and with this bill, all of a sudden they'll have new powers to disrupt. And this is a kind of vague general term that could involve things like breaking and entering, emptying people's bank accounts, smear campaigns.
Emptying people's bank accounts?
Yeah, hacking into computers. Disruption, it's one of these things that kind of national security agencies use and have used in the past. However, Canada has not had these powers. It
sounds like Homeland Security in the United States.
Very similar kind of idea. And the problem is that the language hasn't been clarified by the government, and they're trying to force this through without clarifying a lot of this general language.
Tell us about speech crimes, what that might mean. That sounds Orwellian.
Yeah, so we do actually have some speech crimes in Canada, hate speech, for example, but they're kind of contained. Whereas this new speech crime is kind of anything that encourages or incites terrorism. And not only people who are intentionally doing that, but also people who are reckless to the outcome. And so potentially someone not intending to kind of incite terrorism could be, and it's the crime has up to 5 years as its penalty. And the kind of complexity of this is that we're talking about terrorism, but initially in the bill, they outline what is a threat to Canadian security. And it's not just terrorism. Terrorism is one of 9 things that they outline. And for our conversation, 2 really important ones are, one is the threat to critical infrastructure, and the other one is kind of anything that interferes with Canada's economic stability or financial stability.
That really broadens things.
Absolutely.
So let's get into this then in terms of how it might impact the average Canadian when it comes to infrastructure. No one is really opposed to the idea that if someone is going to laden a dam with dynamite, that's problematic. But where can this take a turn for the average person?
Right. And so when we're talking about critical infrastructure, absolutely, we want to stop people from carrying out actual terrorism. But when we're talking about interference with critical infrastructure, that could actually cover a broad range of things, including things like pipelines in northern BC, including fracking in New Brunswick. And this is where we start to get concerned for environmental activists, for Indigenous activists. The Mi'kmaq in New Brunswick have been doing great work in terms of trying to stop the fracking that's going on there.
Well, they did also torch a couple of RCMP vehicles in their protest.
Absolutely. So there are kind of acts of violence or vandalism happening, but this could actually criminalize anyone who is involved in unlawful, nonviolent civil disobedience. And
that's the crux of it, isn't it?
Exactly. And so they actually say this doesn't apply. These 9 things that we're talking about don't apply to lawful protest, advocacy, dissent, or artistic expression. And the key word there is lawful, because unlawful things include marches that don't have permits, protests that might break a municipal bylaw, any kind of sit-in or blockade, or even a wildcat strike could fall under this.
Even a wildcat strike. Wow. CFAX listeners, are you concerned about the impact Prime Minister Harper's anti-terror bill could have on protesters? What do you think? 250-386-1161, star 1070 on your cell phone. You can email us, talk@cfax1070.com. You can also find us on Facebook. To the phones and Al. Hi, Al. You're on CFAX.
Yeah, hi. I'm concerned about this too, and I usually support this type of thing, but I remember a story, and the details are a little vague, and so I'm going to paraphrase a little bit. There was a grandmother who was visited by the RCMP because she had been taking pictures of the Shell storage tanks, and she thought they were Kinder Morgan. And a Kinder Morgan security representative, had gone to the RCMP saying she was a suspected terrorist. Do you remember that news story?
Yeah, I do.
Mm-hmm.
And the woman was doing nothing wrong. She just wanted to take pictures because she was going to be presenting, and she was visited by the RCMP. When you start to give government that much power, you take away my right to say. I will defend anybody's right to say anything as long as it's legitimate and done in a democratic way. And this bill takes away that right. I mean, whether you're left wing, whether you're an environmentalist, whether you're a right wing, you have to be concerned about our ability as Canadians to stand up and take and represent a different point of view, because we're already seeing eroding of our fundamental rights when the RCMP can make this type of call on an elderly lady.
Right, you bring up a really good point here, Laurel. An innocuous taking of photos warrants, or at least was justifiable for RCMP intervention. Al's giving us a case in point here of where this can go pear-shaped.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think when you think about how recently the RCMP had leaked documents, I don't know if you heard about them, but in them, the RCMP was framing Indigenous activists, environmental activists, anyone involved in this as kind of these violent Aboriginal extremists or anti-petroleum extremists. And so you can really see the linkage between this critical infrastructure threat and this idea of terrorism or extremism.
Thanks for your call, Al. And that is one of the stated modes of stopping pipelines in this province of First Nations. And we saw what happened with Kinder Morgan and Burnaby Mountain, their plans to expand or build on the Trans Mountain pipeline. And I had Greenpeace on the other day with the XL Keystone being vetoed by President Obama, and was asking that spokesperson about the potential for a real focus now on getting oil out of Alberta through British Columbia. And she was pretty confident that, the protesting means of stopping these things was really going to be successful. What you're telling us here is that Canadians' right to protest these kinds of things might become a criminal act.
Yeah, and I mean,
there was some form of law around it anyway. People were arrested, but it's going to have more teeth.
Yeah, absolutely. And it changes from just being kind of an act of civil disobedience that you can get arrested for the law that you are breaking and that you're choosing to break, to this new kind of threat to Canadian security that you now fall under.
And what's the jail time people could do?
It's kind of vague because it depends on kind of what CSIS ends up doing. So the first thing that it opens up is that you are then under CSIS's jurisdiction, and so you can...
Anything can happen. Well, if it's vague.
Well, the thing is that they've actually expanded the powers to detain people without warrants as well. So even before you have a charge on you, you could potentially be detained.
So let's go back to Burnaby Mountain and the protests. If this anti-terror bill had been in place then, what could have happened to the protesters? Do we know? Well,
already we know that there were CSIS kind of agents there and collecting and gathering information. And so potentially, if they were sort of initiating this disruption portion of this, what their new powers would be in this bill, they could do smear campaigns of key people in that. They could do other kinds of disruption to stop that.
It's a bad spy movie. Hi, Gary. You're on CFAX. Morning, Gary.
Good morning.
What are your thoughts?
I'm going to tell you right off the get-go that I'm a slightly right-of-center political thinker.
Okay.
And as far as I'm concerned, this is way too far, way too empowering to give people that may or may not have the right motivation to suspend what I call normal civil rights and what I always believed was an amazing democracy. So I would like to see this bill thrown out big time. And I just can't express how frustrated I am that a majority government that I think has something going for it has taken the attitude that they could just suspend civil rights with this kind of legislation.
Gary, would it be enough for you to not vote for them in the coming election?
Absolutely.
Forceful comment. Thanks for calling, sir. Let's get to Margaret. Hi, Margaret. You're on CFAX.
Yeah, good morning, Pamela. There's no doubt about it. The terrorist threat is a very scary thought, and the sad thing about it, I think, Pamela, is that the government has got onto this and thought that they could put other things in, for instance, to make more things illegal, so that they can have more power to let the corporations in to do the for the pipelines.
Right. You think a broad blanket's being thrown over this thing. It's not just about terrorism.
Yeah, and I think they're using the fear of terrorism to hopefully the people will say, yeah, well, that's going to be okay. But if we didn't have people like the person that's on your show today, or people like you who bring it to our notice, then I think it would just be pushed through.
Let's put this over to Laurel Collins. She is a professor of social justice studies at UVic. She's a panelist on tonight's discussion on Bill C-51 here in Victoria. What do you make of Margaret's comments?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you make a really good point, and this is a 60-page document that they're putting through, kind of one of these omnibus documents, these acts, with so much in it. And the other thing is that it's not just that they're adding things to it. It's actually an ineffective way to address terrorism. And there's been 100 professors of law and related disciplines who have written to Parliament saying, do not prove this. Any rational MP would say no to this bill, because not only does it have all of these kind of dangerous things in it, but that's actually ineffective at addressing terrorism.
CFAX listeners, are you concerned about the impact of Prime Minister Harper's anti-terror bill could potentially have on protesters? We're taking your calls, 250-386-1161. Star 1070 on your cell. You can email us, talk@cfax1070.com. We're also on Facebook. When we come back, Tony and Ron, your calls are up next.
Email talk@cfax1070.com. Pamela McCall on CFAX 1070. All season, CFAX 1070 is giving away trips to see the Canucks play live with the Lucky Canuck. Here's how.
Listen for the CFAX Lucky Canuck during each game. Then go to CFAX1070.com and enter that player's name. You could win tickets to an upcoming game, accommodations at the Rosedale on Robson, and fly round trip with Harbour Air Seaplanes. Plus, you have a chance to win a $50 gift card instantly from Glenwood Meats.
Win with the Lucky Canuck from Glenwood Meats, Harbour Air Seaplanes, and CFAX 1070.
For over 25 years, Pamela Jewelers has provided beautiful jewelry in Victoria. And once a year, they have a sale. It's a special event, and it's on now. So why not drop by? You'll save on almost all in-stock merchandise. That means engagement rings, wedding bands, pearl, colored stone and diamond jewelry, Simon G, silver jewelry, and Tudor watches. The annual sale on now through February 28th at Pamela Jewelers. Family owned at the corner of Fort and Broad. Online at palmerajewelers.com.
A new roof is a big investment. One of the most important decisions you can make for the protection and value of your home. Before you do anything, look into a steel roof from Irwin Industries. It's fireproof, moss-free, with clean lines and concealed fasteners. Available in over 40 colors, your new roof will last virtually forever. Call them for the last roof you'll ever need. 875 Viewfield Road, online at steelroofvictoria.net. Call 382-5154.
If you are planning on downsizing your living situation, this may be the perfect opportunity to upsize your lifestyle. Design, function, and efficiency. The homes of Parkside at Royal Bay have been carefully thought out and designed with the highest attention to detail. West Coast contemporary architecture, energy-efficient designs, designer interiors, top-quality finishes, and appliances. With income-producing legal suites on low-maintenance freehold lots. Imagine life without compromise. Gold winner at the 2014 CARE Awards for Best New Subdivision. The homes of Parkside at Royal Bay. Visit thenewstandard.ca.
Hi, I'm Lyle Babcock, grower of Buck Brand Citrus from Terabella, California, the Good Earth. Over the past few years, you've come to know and love my organic Buck Brand navel oranges. You know, the ones picked ripe, polished with a horsehair brush, and absolutely delicious. Now in season, I invite you to enjoy all of my citrus fruit today, exclusively available at your local Thrifty Foods.
Grandpa, you've done pretty well for yourself. What's your secret?
Jimmy, it's all about planning for your future. And investing in mortgages with a mortgage broker at Great Pacific is a great opportunity for high-yield returns secured by real estate. Then you receive interest on the amount lent out. Great Pacific has been arranging mortgages for over 20 years.
Couldn't I just invest in baseball cards or something?
You're not very smart, are you, Jimmy?
Investing or borrowing? Call Great Pacific Mortgage and Investments. After all, it's your money.
Sarah never expected to need the services at Our Place. She always assumed she'd have a job. But that was before she found herself homeless, living with undiagnosed schizophrenia. Because of Our Place, Sarah has her life back. David suffered a serious head injury when he was a child, and it altered his life. He did poorly in school and turned to drugs. Thanks to Our Place, David received the help he needed and now has a job, a girlfriend, and a place to live.
To learn more or to donate to Our Place, visit ourplacesociety.com.
Where the conversation gets steeped. Cafe Victoria Saturday with Bruce Williams at 3 on CFAX 1070. When you need to make sense of it, it's Pamela McCall on CFAX 1070.
Welcome back. Are you concerned about the impact Prime Minister Harper's anti-terror bill might have on protesters? That is our question for CFAX listeners right now. My guest is Laurel Collins. She is an instructor in social justice studies at UVic. She's also a panelist on a forum being held on Bill C-51 tonight at the First Metropolitan United Church on Balmoral. As promised, to the phones and Tony. Hi, Tony. You're on CFAX.
Hi, ladies. Thank you for taking my call.
You bet.
Definitely concerned about it, without question. And of course, I haven't read it, but certainly I'm concerned about it. But my question to the guest is, perhaps C-51 is in a different context. Looked at it from a different context. Is something that we're preparing for on a larger scale. And I'm not pessimistic, and I'm not one of those who believe the world is in doom and gloom. But I think that we can all agree that the world is in a really interesting place right now, with a ton of stuff going on that we have really not seen before. And perhaps as our government preparing for a bigger picture scenario, and they need that legislation. Maybe not today as we know terrorists, but as anti-terrorism, but as in the future for what is coming. And I don't mean in 10 or 15 or 20 years, but I mean potentially sooner than that, much sooner than that.
Interesting. So
anyways, that's my thought.
Okay, thanks. Let's put that to Laurel.
Yeah, I mean, you bring up some great points. And one is just like that there is this real fear of terrorism, and that it's something that we want to be addressing. And I guess my argument to that would be that this kind of bill isn't what we need. Not only does it have these things that are threatening, but so many kind of lawyers in constitutional law say it's not going to be effective in terms of actually addressing terrorism, and that there are ways of addressing terrorism within kind of the law enforcement structures that we have currently. And one of those ways would be kind of addressing radicalism within Canada. And so putting our focus and putting enough funds into that, as opposed to creating these huge omnibus bills that are vague, that are insert all of these threats to our civil liberties.
But he does bring up a good point in terms of public perception. You know, our government is doing what they need to do to protect. Again, very Homeland Security-esque.
Yeah, and I just read a poll where I think it was 82% of Canadians support this anti-terrorism bill, and I think that's because they don't actually know what it is. And the idea of anti-terrorism is really appealing. Of course, yes, let's stop terrorism, but let's do it in a way that is effective.
Let's see what Ron has to say. Hi, Ron, you're on CFAX.
Yes, hi. I wonder if the government knows what terrorism is, because Justice Minister McCall the other day said for something to be considered terrorism, attack must be culturally motivated. Well, as I understand it, there's nothing in the criminal code about culturally motivated terrorism. It's just a term that he designed. These people have not defined terrorism clearly.
Well, you know, it's interesting, Ron, isn't it? Because it seems like the broad definition is what they're after. after. What do you think, Laurel?
Yeah, and I mean, like McKay's comment around kind of culturally informed, I think actually speaks to the kind of Islamophobia and racism that are kind of that are behind these bills. And that racism also applies to Indigenous communities, and the way in which we are framing kind of violent Aboriginal extremists also speaks to that same kind of racism that is inherent in these kind of bills.
First Nations can stand between pipelines. I mean, if it, running on territorial land. I mean, so it does seem, and I'm not saying definitively, but we're examining this. Is it in part so broad that it will stop protesters, the final defense against pipelines for those who don't want them? Is part of this, as you mentioned, omnibus, ramming all of this through, aimed at that?
I don't know about the government's intention, but I do know that this could potentially be used in that way. And it's a violation of Section 35, the Aboriginal rights, and to protect their rights and titles. I think that this kind of bill is a serious threat to that.
Hi, Mary, you're on CFAX. What do you think?
Hello?
Hi, Mary, you're on CFAX.
Yes, hi. I'm extremely concerned about the bill, as most folks seem to be, and I have 2 points. The first point is that according to the poll that your guest just mentioned, the 82% of Canadians being in favour, the other part of that poll, and it's worth remembering that, is that apparently 69% of Canadians want more oversight. So that's worth remembering. Now, I'd like to ask your guest, what can ordinary Canadians do to stop this thing? It's always good to sort of find out if people are concerned, but the main thing is, if you are concerned, what the heck can you do? Because Prime Minister Harper certainly doesn't seem to listen to ordinary Canadians.
Thanks, Mary. Laurel Collins, instructor at Social Justice Studies at UVic.
Yeah, great question. And the first thing I would recommend would be to write to your MP, write to the leaders of the federal party, write to Justin Trudeau. Why is the Liberal Party supporting this bill along with the Conservatives? Write to Stephen Harper. Yes, he may not listen, but have it out there that we as citizens do not support this bill. Talk to your friends about it. Come to the public forum here in Victoria tonight at 7.
Public safety critic Randall Garrison is my guest at 11:30, NDP MP for Esquimalt-Wanda Fuca. So you'll want to listen to that also to see what he has to say about this. He is co-hosting this event this evening, of course. Let's get to Gloria now. Hi, Gloria.
Hi. Thanks for having me on, Pamela.
Sure.
I feel very strongly about this issue. In fact, I've just been doing a lot of research into what's been going on with all these anti-terrorism bills and the way that they're taking away our freedoms. And I think Benjamin Franklin summed it up best 250 years ago when he said, "He who sacrifices freedom for security deserves neither. And people willing to trade their freedom for security will lose both." And we've seen that over history, and before you know it, the tables have turned and the government is becoming the terrorist.
Wow, powerful.
And one more thing I'd like to add to that. In this day of technology, where we are able to be monitored and spied on more than we have ever before in history, this is setting us up for a very dangerous, communistic, fascist-type society. I can see it coming, and I'm very concerned about it.
Thanks, Gloria. Laurel.
Yeah, and I think that this kind of bill, it has all of those kind of dangerous implications. It also creates this climate in Canada, which is not the kind of culture that I want to live in, which is a kind of culture of fear. And when we start kind of limiting these kinds of acts of dissent, I don't know if people have seen the new movie Selma, but when Martin Luther King was walking across that bridge, that was an unlawful act of civil disobedience. And those are important to our country, to our democracy, to our ability to hold our government to account.
Kathy, you're next. Hi, you're on CFAX.
Yes, I guess just to follow up on Gloria's comment about rights. Our charter rights are being overridden by this bill under the guise of terrorism. But there we now have a problem with the judicial system, because how are they going to respond to CSIS scooping people without warning or advice and taking care of them themselves instead of turning them over to the RCMP as the present distribution of powers are laid out. And how are judges going to be able to insist on charter of rights?
Good questions, Laurel.
Yeah, so I mean, there's a couple things in there, and one of them is that judges are going to be put into this new position where CSIS will be coming to them and asking kind of permission if they can go against our regular charter rights. And this is the kind of position that judges aren't going to be used to, that there isn't necessarily a precedent for it. And CSIS doesn't necessarily have to go to them if, it's kind of their call whether or not they go and ask permission from the judge. And then, like your point around kind of once CSIS has done this, then the impact on the judicial system. And this is why Supreme Court judges, former intelligence officers, 4 of our former prime ministers are all coming out against this bill, urging MPs not to vote in favor of it.
All right. And you're speaking this evening. The session starts at 7 o'clock at the First Metropolitan United Church, 932 Balmoral Road. And listeners should be aware that Randall Garrison, NDP MP for Esquimalt-Wanda Fuca, is on this program with me in about half an hour. And Murray Rankin, who's also hosting the public forum, will be on with Ian Jessup this afternoon. Thank you so much, Laurel, for being on the program.
Thank you, Pamela. Take care.
Laurel Collins, instructor in social justice studies.